Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Chris Eve. Um, I'm giving a talk today about the life of my grandfather, William Francis Eve. I was very touched. It's about 2 months ago that, out of the blue, Harrow and Wealdstone Museum just contacted me asking me if I would give a talk about the life of my grandfather. Um, I'm assuming it was because he'd seen contacts listed with the National Army Museum in Chelsea, um, where I donated a lot of his First World War memorabilia over 20 years ago, after my grandmother died, um, and my father. So anyway, so thank you. I'm very grateful. My grandfather wasn't famous. He was one of millions of soldiers who did his duty. Um, and the thing that is different about him in certain respects is that he kept a diary in the trenches, which, as you probably know, was frowned upon. It wouldn't have been allowed because, if these things fell into enemy hands. Um, and the diary is also with the National Army Museum. Um, Let me give you a brief mention why I was asked, why genealogy? Why did I get into genealogy? Oops. Um, well, growing up, I didn't know my family very well. My parents split when I was 8, and so I didn't see a lot of my family, my father's side, and my grandparents on either side. So as I grew older, I wanted to find out my heritage. Who was I from? Who am I? As we all are on a search for identity in some way. And my father had been into genealogy when he was a young man back in the 50s and 60s. And so I carried on, and I've been researching my family history since the 1980s, and started a professional course with the Institute of Heraldic and Genealogical Studies in Canterbury in, I think it was 2011, and I've almost finished it. I'll be finishing end of next year. Um, so I am a genealogist and I'm not fully qualified yet. Um, I've lived in Lancashire, around Lancaster, for over 20 years. And I'm calling you actually from a friend's house in Carnforth, which is a town just to the north of Lancaster in North Lancashire. But I was born in Guildford. I studied in London, and for a while, back in the early 90s, I was briefly the local history librarian for the London Borough of Barnet. And over those years, I have been to Harrow quite a few times to explore my heritage, where my family came from. So my great grandparents were in Harrow, my grandparents, and my father until he got married in 1959. So that's a bit about why I got into genealogy, and I love it. I love researching and helping other people find their roots as well as my own. Um, I remember my grandfather sitting on his knee in his rocking chair. I remember running behind him on his sit-down lawnmower, pushing him round on that. And I remember playing, not Scrabble, Monopoly with him, with the family. Um, so I do have memories of him. He was a very quiet man, and he didn't talk much, and he certainly didn't talk about the Great War, as most veterans, like most veterans. So, as a genealogist, and this may help you if you're in family history and want to research your family trees, um, there are various steps you need to take. I'm just trying to move this toolbar. So, how do you go about genealogy? Well, the first thing, you always start by interviewing your oldest um, family members before they pop their clogs. Get right down their stories. So, birth, marriage, deaths, family stories. What family papers are there? You probably inherited a load of stuff or will do. That's worth going through. you need to find out birth, marriage, and death certificates. That's the nuts and bolts of genealogy, family history. Look at census returns, parish registers, or nonconformist records, which are usually kept in local history libraries or local archives, borough archives, or county record offices. School records. Sometimes the old school of your ancestors may keep an archive of some records, and I was able to find some of that for my grandfather. And then obviously very much related to this talk, military records. I just need to move this screen again. So the National Archives is the main repository for military records, and there's their website. The National Army Museum, where my grandfather's memorabilia have gone, that's their website. Imperial War Museum might have some stuff. I've got some family stuff there. And a very good, more modern website is called Forces War Records. It is a subscription site, but it's got some good stuff on there. And then occupational records, what for their work or career, did the company they work for keep records? And then the favorite websites for genealogy is Ancestry, ancestry.co.uk, Find My Past, The Genealogist, Free BMD, it's Free Birth, Marriage and Death Certificates. That's a good site. And then the GRO for General Registration Office for, getting copies of birth, marriage and death certificates. So if we go on to Grandpa himself, he was born 22nd September 1894 in West Brixton, Lambeth, and he married on the 15th of July 1922 when he was 27 years old at St George's Headstone at Pinnerview. I'm assuming that people who are attending this will know these places or know of them. And then he died on 20th February 1981. He was 86, and he died in East Horsley in Surrey. He retired there with Granny to be near my father, who was living down there then. So they're his parents. So Richard Edward and Emmeline Augusta Eve. I think that photo is probably around about 1900, looking at the style of dress and the sort of age that they appear to be. And his mother's maiden name was Mellowish, which is a Devonshire name originally. Right. Can the host, the lady there help me from, is that Sarah?
Yeah.
There are three little windows which have got my face and your face and a friend's face, and they're covering up some of these slides. How do I get them out of the way?
I can move my little box on our end, but that will not change yours, I guess. You can move it down or up corners.
I think I'll just have to do it manually. Is it disturbing other people's viewing?
It's been okay. It's been on the corner, so you haven't missed. Yeah.
Okay.
You haven't missed much.
All right.
So no.
Okay. Right. We'll carry on. So, yeah. So his birthplace, I discovered years later through looking at Lambeth archives, was actually destroyed by a V1 flying bomb. Very exact details and casualties in the area. 25th of June 1944. The 03:44 hours, very early in the morning. He was baptized in Brixton at St Paul's, and then the family was living in Croydon from 1901 until the end of 1905, and they're the schools he attended down there. And then they moved to Wealdstone, and he attended Lower School of John Lyon on Middle Road in Harrow on the Hill. And there's a photograph of the school. So he attended from about age 11 till he was 15, from about January 1906 to summer of 1910. And now I've got some maps of the area. So there's John Lyons School in off Middle Road in Harrow. This is from Google Maps. So you're allowed to do this if you accredit it for educational purposes. And I've got to move this box again. Hang on. Just one sec. There we are. So Grandpa is sitting bottom left. I think this photo is probably about 1906, and I'm assuming this is he and his brothers who were attending John Lyons School at the time. So his brothers were Gerald, Hubert, and Jack. Gerald was the oldest. And the addresses they had initially in Harrow, so they were renting a place in Nibthwaite Road, called Homely. I've found Nibthwaite Road, but I've not been able to yet trace which would have been the actual house. If anybody listening would have any knowledge about that, I'd be very interested to learn more and visit. Now, on the census of 1911, he's not actually in Harrow. He's down in West Ealing in Midhurst Road, and he's staying with his one of his aunts and uncles who had a fruitery business. So I assume he's left school by then, and he's helping out with their work or just visiting them. Anyway, then in 1912, September 1912, the family moves to Harrow View, number 79, and the house was called Ardmore. It's still there. I visited years ago, and it's on the brow of a hill, and it's a brick built, I think it's semi-detached. And the last time I visited years ago, it was being run as an old people's home. So here's a map of that area. So in the yellow highlighted place saying 79, that's Harrow View. And then Nibthwaite Road is just to the east of it. Harrow Town Centre is further down the bottom of the road. And then there's other places I've highlighted there, St George's Headstone and the number 84. I'll come into that. And then now in the artifacts I found, I've got some of his papers in some suitcases. I've got a memorandum of agreement. So this is a tenancy agreement that he signed on when he was at Homely, Nibthwaite Road, and this is when he's about to move to Ardmore. It's quite interesting. Okay, then we go on to World War One, then a couple of years later, and there he is, as a rifleman, as a private, and I assume that's taken in a Harrow studio. And he was in the 1st Battalion of the the County London Regiment, Queen's Westminster Rifles. And so I think this is probably August of 1914. He joined right at the beginning. So he would have been 19 then, just before his 20th birthday. And there's a cap badge for the Queen's Westminsters. Now, I mentioned he kept a trench diary. That diary I found in my grandmother's bureau in 1993. My father and I were visiting her, and it just for tea time or something, and just a throwaway comment was that, oh, Grandpa kept a diary, meaning in the First War. And I asked her where did she have it, where it was? And she said, oh, it's in the bureau somewhere. And there it was, the pocket-sized diary, leather-bound. And she let me borrow it. And it was all written in. It had a pencil in the. It doesn't show on the flap, but it had a pencil in there. So Grandpa kept this diary in pencil while he was in the trenches for the first year. Now, it was a 1914 diary, but it doesn't start until about September, I think, August, September. So I think his father gave it to him as a birthday present for his 20th birthday. And so it actually goes on from September right the way through to the following September 1915. So where it says on this picture, it's saying January 1914, it's actually January 1915. And at the time, Granny let me borrow it, and I copied it out onto Amstrad computer. It took me about 3 months trying to decipher this writing, and I got most of it. And this is, I've just taken extracts from what he wrote. So it's an Asper's pocket diary, and then he's asking anybody who finds it to please return it. And then there's things like personal memoranda at the top. So it's even got his size in hats, boots, his weight, and the address. There we are, W.F. Eve, Ardmore, Harrow View. And then, now this is a genealogist's dream, he puts in the names and birthdays of all the family. So there's Richard Edward, his father, born in 1857, his mother in 1866, Gerald, Hubert, Jack, and himself in 1894. So that was a big help to research some of the other family members. And there he is. This is a photograph of him. He's reclining down on the front on the left. They've all got cigarettes in their mouths. And this is a training camp. And I reckon this is probably late autumn, maybe November time, October, before they sailed. And I'm guessing it's possibly near Aldershot. So it's an army camp and training. And here we are. Then we come on to the diary extract. So I'll read it out. I don't know if you'll be able to see the writing. Can the people see the writing on the screen? Yeah. I'll read it out. So November 1914. So the 1st of November, they leave Southampton for the Havre at 7 p.m. on the Maiden with the Liverpool Scottish. They're still on the boat on the 2nd. And on the 3rd, they disembark and they march 3.5 miles to a rest camp. On the Wednesday, the 4th, they carry on to entrained for St. Omer, because Le Havre is quite away from the Pas de Calais. And on the 11th November, they leave Hazebrouck, for Bayeux. So this is the area just to the southwest of Ypres. They have 4 stops, so they're marching there. And then I've just added in a map. So you've got Calais right at the top left. And this is the area that he was in with the Queen's Westminsters. So you've got Hazebrouck, Bayeux. I've highlighted them on the map. Armentières, Popperinga, and Ypres. Right, on the 18th, they left the farm 6:30, marched back to the village to an old laundry for billet, cleared it all out, went to another farm close by, cleaned straw, breakfast 8 a.m, slack morning. It's just sort of fairly boring stuff, some of this. Had wash and general clean up, cleaned a rifle, had a game of bridge, several aeroplanes overhead fired at, large guns continually firing close by, dinner at 2 p.m, 40 winks at 3, tea at 4:30, rested till 8 p.m, tucked in with George under the same blanket, went to bed at 8:30, sent letter home. Now then the tone of these diary entries changes. On returning in the morning, found a lot of the bunks had fallen in course through the change in weather, everything in a filthy state, all mud. Brooks, a fellow in 11 company, found in the morning buried alive. Short rations again, complaint made. Sent FS card home, Brooks buried at farm at our rear. On the 24th of November, one of our fellows named Tate, killed while bringing in rations just before dawn, shot in the head just close to our dugout. Sergeant Rogers shot in the chest and Matt shot in the knee while going to help. Had first worn stuff at 1 o'clock, cup of cocoa and biscuits. One battery behind just started to shell the German lines. I've kept in Grandpa's spelling mistakes, so because I wanted to keep it sort of authentic as I could. Oh, sorry, no, that was Christmas Eve. So Christmas Day, this is Christmas Day. We're in December now. At beginning of day, respect for Xmas shown. On both sides, fellows stood on the parapet and struck matches and shouted across greetings to each other. When it got light, everybody strolled about, conversed with the Germans, exchanged souvenirs, played football, and not a shot fired all day or night. Beautiful day, white frost. On Boxing Day, I stood to at 4:30. I left trenches for the billets at Hooplines, 4.5 miles at 4:45, relieved by the Fusiliers. Not a shot fired while leaving. Ripping march through to billets, a factory in the town. Went out and had a ripping dinner, pork and eggs and coffee, Xmas pudding when got back. Had gift from Princess Mary, box with pipe and tobacco and case with tobacco and cigarettes. I remember that case and some of the unsmoked cigarettes. They're still there, and they're at the National Army Museum now. Right, now on the basis of that, and some of you may have come across articles like this, Grandpa wrote an article for the newspaper, which I had. I've still got copies of it. It's again, it's in the museum, and it's called Simply Wonderful. This is from January 1915. Football between the British and German trenches, from Rifleman William Eve of the 1st Battalion, Queen's Westminsters. I'll read it. I have never and am not likely again to witness such scenes as took place last night and this morning. The order was sent down from our captain that during Christmas we were not to do any sniping unless we were sniped at. So last night we were talking to the Germans in their trenches and standing up on the parapet with lighted matches. Never to be forgotten. It was a beautiful moonlit night and the ground was white with frost. It was a spectacle never to be forgotten. We were like a lot of ants on an anthill, and all right up to now. Our fellows and the Germans have been walking about, meeting halfway. Our chaps took out cake and chocolate. It is simply wonderful that here, in the midst of war, this glorious day should have such a hold as to make peace between us for a day. Tomorrow we should be going for each other again. Our chaps actually have been playing football in front, and the officers were allowed to go and converse, providing they were dressed as privates. Try and picture it yourself. There is not a gun to be heard, and everyone strolling about as though there was no thought of war. God surely reigns on high. Of course, we were prepared for a surprise, and the frost was so severe last night that we had to work the bolts of our rifles every quarter of an hour to keep them free. And this morning the German soldiers were calling out Happy Christmas and various other things they knew. It is wicked that we should be here shooting each other when they don't want to fight any more than we do. Some of our chaps have just come in. They have been exchanging cigarettes. This is a ragtime war. It's a very moving article. There's a wonderful film which I've got on DVD. I see it every Christmas now. It's called Joyeux Noël. It's a French film based on the Christmas truce of 1914. And if you're interested, I highly recommend you buy that. So we're now January 1915. Friday the 1st it was. So guard 3:15 to 5:15, and then another half an hour, 10:15 to 10:45. Went back to billet at about 11 o'clock to act as guard to the relief guard of the DLI, that's Durham Light Infantry. After being relieved, went with another chap and had a couple of eggs and coffee, and then got kit together and went with George for another cup of coffee. Paraded at 4:45, moved to trenches at 5 p.m, told off with 6 others, including George, for advance trench, had to go through sewer, got jolly wet as usual. And here is an article he wrote about that expedition through a sewer. And for some reason, this was published in the Dundee Evening Telegraph and Post on Monday the 15th of January. The witching waves, here we are, here we are, here we are again. I'm with an advance party consisting of 5 others and a corporal in a trench between our line and the Germans. To get to it, we had to go through a sewer. It was a job. Of course, being dark, we couldn't see, and the regulars we relieved told us that we could get through with our packs on. The water was about 6 inches deep and pouring through fast. There were planks and pieces of wood to walk on at first, but we couldn't find them in the dark. Then we had to go through about 10 yards of brick tunnel, which is only 3 feet high. With our packs on, it was as much as we could to get through. We got stuck in the middle and had to go on our knees part of the way. That was that. So a week later, he's saying Roach shot whilst getting water, and Tibbs, SB, shot while going to his aid in the mouth. Laid in the open all day, was brought in the evening, unconscious but still alive, passed away soon after. And then on the 17th of January, paraded sick with feet. He wrote home. He went to a dressing station. I'm just going to skim read because time is belting by. He waited for a horse ambulance that took him to Armentier, stayed the night in hospital. Regular gave me German stud and English knife as souvenirs. And there's Armentier, highlighted in the middle. And on the 19th, now, collision with buckled 2 rear carriages. So he's being evacuated back. He's gone to Boulogne and then by ship for Southampton. And then he's staying at Netley Hospital. That was a famous First World War hospital in Southampton. And then gets the train up to hospital in Leicester. And he's there for 10 days, stayed in Leicester 10 days, hospital. And there's his casualty form. This is kept at the National Archives, the Army, First World War records, with the dates 23rd of January. And this, now years ago, I did live in Leicester for a year or two, and this is what was North General Hospital, Leicester. So this is still Leicester General Hospital, the old entrance. So that's what he would have seen. And he was admitted with trench foot. And then he goes back to the front for a second time in August of 15. He's promoted to Lance Corporal in either in the July or the August. And this is his route. Abbeville, Etaples, Boulogne, Saint-Omer, stopped at Hazebrook, Popperinga, and then he marched to Ypres after only stopping 3/4 of an hour. And there's Ypres above Armentier, that's right in the south. And then we've got marching to woods. They're relieving the Durhams, I think. And the guns have bombarded the Germans at line at Hooge. So this is the Battle of Hooge he's involved in, which was July and August 15. Excuse me. And there's more explanation here. I'm not going to read all this. He's feeling pretty rotten again. He's got dysentery. And then on the 14th, this is quite useful because it gives some details about the regiment and where they are. So they're being expected by General Plummer in command of the Second Army. So they're in the 18th Brigade of the 6th Division, 3rd Army Corps, 2nd Army. And then he talks about his breakfast, as you do. And he gets a letter from home, and the batteries are going again. And he says, "Marvelous shooting by the Germans, 11 casualties." That was very gracious of him, wasn't it? Shell passed just over our head, going in the ground just behind us, just by us. Now we're into September 1915 now, so we've come almost full circle. So again, he's talking about his breakfast, and about 5:45 we had a shell landed just a short distance where I was laying. We quickly took to the trenches, just got in when they came quickly. That were the shells, I think. At about 6:30 they sent several gas shells which exploded just where we were, throwing a lot of earth on me. The fumes making me feel very queer. All well at 7 p.m. Casualties, 7 wounded and 2 killed. Right, and then we've got a letter from his aunt. There were about 4 or 5 letters from the family. So it's from Aunt Frisco. So she's wishing my grandfather happy 21st birthday, and she looking forward to seeing him back. Yeah, and yeah, they're going down to Margate for a weekend or something. Right, and by October he's back in Blighty. Gets a train to Baker Street and quarters. He's being measured up. Now I think he's being measured for he was commissioned at this time. And he's gazetted to the 6th Rifles. So he moved from the County of London Regiment, the Queen's Westminsters, to the City of London. So he's in the 3rd Battalion now. He's commissioned. And he becomes the battalion signals officer, and he goes from a signaling class at Chelsea Barracks, and then he's sent out to the front again. Now the diary doesn't go because I think it would have been too risky to keep a diary once he got commissioned, and he might have been too busy anyway. So he's at the beginning of the Somme offensive. And he's invalided out with epilepsy brought on by the shelling at the end of July 16. And there's his signalling class, and he's on the extreme right-hand end, second in, next to, I think there's a sergeant there. He's just standing there in his greatcoat. And here are the 4 brothers in uniform. This would be when they're on leave, no doubt, back in Harrow. So William is top left, Hubert is top right. He stayed in the army, made a career out of it. And then you got Gerald on the left and Jack on the right. All 4 brothers came back from the war. Now, their next door neighbors also had 4 sons, and they all died in the Great War. It must have been terrible for them, terrible. And think all the neighbors' sons all came back. And there's a lovely family grouping. Again, it'd be Harrow Studio that's done this. So you've got Richard Edward at the front, seated there. Next, Aunt Frisco, I believe, is on his right, on right of him as you're looking at the photo. Emmeline, his mother, their mother is on the extreme left. And there's another lady, I think she was, I've got it recorded somewhere, I think she was called Daisy. She may have been a girlfriend of one of them, I'm not sure. And then the census of 1921, which is now obviously open because we've passed 2021. And he's now 26 years old and 26 years, 9 months. He's single, born in Clapham, Surrey. He's a sub-manager under his father at Aspreys & Co. Limited, which was a gold and silver manufacturers of Bond Street. And then just 2 weeks later, his father dies. And William's only 26 then. And this is the page from the 1921 census. He marries, there's one of his wedding photographs, to Alice Emily Rigdon, and she was born and grew up at 2 Peterborough Road, bottom Harrow and the Hill. And her father, Hubert Rigdon, was a pharmaceutical chemist, and there was that property was a chemist shop. She was born in 1900, and the building is still there. I think it's a solicitor's now. And this is where they got married, St George's Headstone, in 96 Pinnerview. And there is Pinnerview on the map and St George's Headstone. Now, at the time of his wedding, he was living at St George's Lodge, which was, I think it's where the vicar lived for St George's Headstone at that time. So his father had died by then, but the family still owned Ardmore and Harrow View until 1954, when I think Gerald, his mother died in 54, and Gerald was still living with his mum, I think. And there's the marriage certificate. St George's Lodge, Pinnerview. And they had 2 children, my dad, 11th of August 24, and their daughter, Mary, in April 28. And there they are. That must be in the garden when they lived in Kenton. And so they lived at, after they got married, they lived at 55 Northwick Avenue, Kenton. It's just opposite Northwick Park Tube Station on the Metropolitan line. And there's a photo of my father outside the front door in probably about 1931. And then the same place when he took me up to Harrow to show me, where he grew up, where he was born. And there it is on the map there. They seem to have stayed briefly at number 45 as well, unless there's a transcription error somewhere. And these are the addresses in and around Harrow right until 1964. So the house at Kenton, Northwick Avenue, Grandpa called it Maywardine, and it was named after 3 ships: the Maiden, that he went to war with, the Woodara, that one of Granny's brothers was a merchant navy man who sailed to Australia, and the Quarrydene, her other brother served on the merchant navy on the Quarrydene, so it made it Maywardine. Then they had a sort of disastrous move to Rickmansworth, and they only stayed there a few months and came back. And while they were hunting for a house, they seemed to have stayed at Bonnesfield Lane, Manor Court in Wealdstone, until they finally settled at Woodcock Hill, number 72 in Kenton. And then that was for quite some years during the war years. And then post-war, they moved to South Hill Avenue in Harrow. So they were sort of going up in the world, you might say. And there's the various addresses in Central, just to the east of Harrow Central. Now, Grandpa, his career was with Asprey, so which is or was still working there. It's a 250-year-old company founded by Huguenots, I understand, I think in about 1781, and they're by royal appointment. He also served as a special constable during the Second World War and during the general strike of 1926. That's not him. That's just something I've sourced online, which was you could use that photo. And there he is as a young man, sometime in the 1920s. And this is a silver bookmark, spring-loaded bookmark that he patented. I've got the patent, found that, and they produced them in chromium, silver, and gold in the Art Deco style. And I've inherited 4 of those. He sailed to America on a business trip on the RMS Aquitania in 1927, on a business trip. And there he is working in his office at Aspreys. And that was it. That's March 1929. And there's a photo of his father, Richard Edward, just behind. Can you see behind the desk on the wall? And there he is. I've got that where I live. I've got that photo. And as I say, he went to the low school, John Lyon. Well, so did my father. And this is a school book that my father was awarded a form prize. That's just it's embossed on the back. I've just done a small shot of that. The Wonder Book of Empire, different age, isn't it? Published in 36. That was the 10th edition. There's the award on the front cover, and that's what it looks like inside. There's Woodcock Hill. Now, my dad and my aunt, they played tennis at Norfolk Park Tennis Club, which is now a Masonic centre, I understand. And we go to World War II. Now, can my host, is it Sarah? We're really getting on in time. Do you really want me to cut this short, or can I extend a little bit?
You can 5-10 minutes, and then a quick Q&A.
I'll be quick as I can. Yeah. Okay, so here he is, Grandpa again. A decade later, roughly, in his office, and this would have been in Aspreys factory number 1, which was in the Euston Road, opposite Euston Station. And I think that's probably about 1942. There's his father's photo behind him again. Lovely old telephone on the desk. And he was given the job. A lot of companies were requisitioned to do war work. I'm sure you're aware of that. And so was Aspreys. And because they were absolutely precision work, they were producing work mainly for the Admiralty. And Grandpa was made the chairman of the Silversmiths and Jewelers War Production Group. And that's one of his business cards that survives. And that's off a list of the directors of that group. I think there were about 38 different companies in that part of London that were all involved got together and took on contracts for the Admiralty. And that's Grandpa just at the back inspecting some war work they're doing in the factory for Aspreys. And that's an organizational chart of all the companies involved. And apparently this was the best picture of Granny and Grandpa. They're looking very mellow there. And then tragically, their daughter, Mary, she died. She was only 15. That's my egg timer going off. She died in Wembley Hospital of spinal meningitis, just as the all clear was sounding after an air raid. So you can imagine it absolutely devastated them. It also delayed my own father's entry into the war. He joined the RAF as a pilot later on. He got compassionate leave. Post-war, William Eve is made admitted into the freedom of the city, London. That would have been based on his war work for Asprey. There's an OS map from the National Library of Scotland. By the way, for those who are interested, almost every Ordnance Survey map in the country, a whole country, is kept by the National Library of Scotland, and it's free access. You don't need a subscription, and all different scales going right back to Victorian era and other maps. There's a map of Harrow. Now, some of the post-war work he did, this was arguably the most interesting stuff that inherited. There's a photograph, black and white photograph of a golden cigarette box that was manufactured under my grandfather's supervision, and it was literally a gift for Princess Elizabeth's wedding to Philip on the 20th of November 1947. And here's a letter from E.R. Asprey to my grandfather regarding receiving a letter of thanks that they'd received from Princess Elizabeth in July 48. And this is the said letter. So it's Buckingham Palace, 6th of July 1948. Dear Sir Harry, I was so grateful to the Royal Society of Arts for the magnificent gold box which they have given me as a wedding present. It is an object of great beauty, the design of which I particularly admire. I send you and the members of the Society my warmest thanks for a really delightful present, which I shall always treasure. Yours sincerely, signed Elizabeth. So that was very gratifying. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on a second business trip to the States in 1950 on the Queen Elizabeth. And there's a photo I sourced on the web. And he was there in 3 months this time. And there he is coming down the stairs, probably dressed for dinner. You know, one of the ship's photographers has taken it. And there is Asprey's old showroom in New Bond Street. Now, they've actually moved from there. I think they've closed down. Another firm, I think it's Garrard's, has taken it on. And it's a magnificent building, beautiful. Anyway, Grandpa retired from there in March 1960. He was, it was ill health, but he had a long retirement right till 81. So he was retired for 21 years. And then his mother died in Tooting Bec Hospital when William was 59. He was also, I discovered, a trustee of St. Vincent's Hospital in Eastcote, Pinner, which is a few mile, a mile or two to the west. I believe it's some sort of elderly home now, something like that. It closed in 2000. So Grandpa would have been a trustee in the 1950s before they moved down to Surrey. And there's St. Vincent's to the left of the museum, Headstone Manor Museum. And then in 53, they moved to this house, Breakland, South Hill Avenue. And there's South Hill Avenue on the map. So it's to the west-southwest of South Harrow Station. And then this map is I've tried to show all the places he lived around Harrow area. So it's quite a number of places over a good length of time. And of course, I'm a great-grandparents and my father, right from basically from 24 until 59, apart from when he was away in the services. And then they retired down to the village of East Horsley in Surrey, and he died at home. Interesting, their last bungalow they had, they call that the Maywoodine as well, like the first house in Kenton after those 3 ships. And there's my dad treated them to a around the world trip, and there they are on a floating restaurant in Hong Kong Harbour, their golden running anniversary in 1972. And there they are. There's the first bungalow in East Horsley, and there's Granny and Grandpa. And then so he died 20th February 81. Granny, his wife, she died 27th March 99, and my father died 28th of October 99. And then clearing out, helping Dad clear out her bungalow. These were some of the memorabilia I found. I knew about the shell case that had been in their lounge, but there was a great big photograph of a regimental photo there, and his officer's tunic. It was in the attic, and there's his tunic, second lieutenant. His three medals, strips, and his wound stripe. The wound stripe is on the left arm as you're looking at the screen. And there's his medals. He got the 1914 Star and Mons Bar, British War Medal, and the Victory Medal. And I'm sure you all know they were nicknamed Pipsqueak and Wilfred. And yeah, after I think they were sort of cartoon characters. And he also was awarded the Silver War Badge. Now that is a screenshot of online of it. It was fitted on your lapel. It's about an inch in diameter, and it was known as the wound badge. So servicemen who were invalided out of the army applied and were awarded these badges so that when they were seen in Civvy Street, they weren't accused of being shirkers, not doing their duty, because there had been cases of ladies giving the white feather of cowardice to men who were not in uniform. Unfortunately, my grandfather lost his badge in 1917, and there's a whole load of letters which I've not included to the War Office trying to plead for a replacement. I have got a replacement. You can get replica medals from authorized companies. And there we are. I'm wearing Grandpa's tunic there. It fitted me like a glove. Absolutely fitted me like a glove. I was astonished. I'm trying to look very sort of military there. Anyway, that went to the National Army Museum. It was a big, do I keep it? Do I let it go? Yeah, there was a sword. There was a Sam Brown belt. All the brass buttons and everything. It was a delight to have. And there we are. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name is Chris Eve. I'm giving a talk today about the life of my grandfather, William Francis Eve. I was very touched. It's about 2 months ago that, out of the blue, Harrow and Wealdstone Museum just contacted me asking me if I would give a talk about the life of my grandfather. I'm assuming it was because he'd seen contacts listed with the National Army Museum in Chelsea, where I donated a lot of his First World War memorabilia over 20 years ago, after my grandmother died, and my father. So anyway, so thank you. I'm very grateful. My grandfather wasn't famous. He was one of millions of soldiers who did his duty. The thing that is different about him in certain respects is that he kept a diary in the trenches, which, as you probably know, was frowned upon. It wouldn't have been allowed because, if these things fell into enemy hands. And the diary is also with the National Army Museum. Let me give you a brief mention why I was asked, why genealogy? Why did I get into genealogy? Oops. Well, growing up, I didn't know my family very well. My parents split when I was 8, and so I didn't see a lot of my family, my father's side, and my grandparents on either side. So as I grew older, I wanted to find out my heritage. Who was I from? Who am I? As we all are on a search for identity in some way. And my father had been into genealogy when he was a young man back in the 50s and 60s. And so I carried on, and I've been researching my family history since the 1980s, and started a professional course with the Institute of Heraldic and Genealogical Studies in Canterbury in think it was 2011, and I've almost finished it. I'll be finishing end of next year. So I am a genealogist and I'm not fully qualified yet. I've lived in Lancashire, around Lancaster, for over 20 years. And I'm calling you actually from a friend's house in Carnforth, which is a town just to the north of Lancaster in North Lancashire. But I was born in Guildford. I studied in London, and for a while, back in the early 90s, I was briefly the local history librarian for the London Borough of Barnet. And over those years, I have been to Harrow quite a few times to explore my heritage, where my family came from.